I took my cousin's place in the imperial selection. Once selected, I became a high-ranking princess. My cousin, on the other hand, married the eldest son of a marquis's mansion, who was physically disabled. From then on, my cousin regarded me as a thorn in her side. When I went out to burn incense, she rushed into my palanquin and stabbed me dozens of times. But she didn't know that it wasn't me sitting in the sedan chair. Later, I died of old age. When I opened my eyes again, I was back to before the selection. This time, my cousin didn't pretend to be sick. Her smiling face revealed her determination to win. It turned out that she had also been reborn, and the marriage to the marquis's mansion naturally fell on me. On the day of the wedding, my cousin dressed in her finest attire, looking down on me with arrogance. This blessing of being a widow is yours, sister. I'm going to be the prince's consort. Chapter 1. I laughed. Just changing the place to be a widow, this is something I'm quite skilled at. Where does she get the confidence that she can become a prince's consort? Does she really think that the position of prince's consort is something our Lin family has passed down through generations? I was reborn on the day the imperial decree for the beauty selection was issued. My cousin, who was supposed to pretend to be sick, stepped forward gracefully, ignoring her aunt's objections. She spoke firmly, as the eldest sister. I should set an example and contribute to the family's honor. Thus, the selection spot naturally fell to her. Those beautiful peach blossom eyes gleamed with determination. I knew then that she had also been reborn. In this dynasty, the imperial selection takes place every 3 years. All eligible women from families with officials of the 5th rank or higher must participate. However, spots are limited, with only 1 per family. My grandfather came from a humble background and spent decades toiling his way up to a 5th rank official in the capital. My sisters and I barely managed to qualify for the selection. Yet my uncle and father, despite having been in officialdom for years, remain low-ranking officials with little prospect of advancement. Without a powerful maternal family, a beauty contestant is nothing more than a token participant, going through the motions. With a bit of luck, one might be dismissed and return home. But with bad luck, one might be forced to become a concubine for a nobleman. Either way, it was no desirable fate. Therefore, my elder cousin, who was clever, feigned illness to avoid the selection. As the only eligible candidate in our family, I had no choice but to face the challenge head-on, whether I wanted to or not. Yet, to everyone's surprise, despite my humble background and ordinary appearance, I managed to turn the tables and catch the eye of the Empress Dowager, who chose me as the wife of the 3rd prince, transforming me from an ordinary girl into a princess overnight. Those events are still vivid in my memory. Before I could think further, I met my cousin's challenging gaze. She laughed mockingly without any restraint. Since I've entered the palace to participate in the selection, the marriage with the Shuangwen Marquis family naturally belongs to my younger sister. The Shuangwen Marquis family was a century-old aristocratic family with a prestigious background. The matriarch of the family, Lady Yang, is the younger sister of the Empress, further highlighting their prestige. Had it not been for the eldest son's illness, our family would have been eager to secure this marriage. 3 years ago, during the Western Campaign, the eldest son of the Marquis of Zhongwu was ambushed and severely wounded. The prominent families that had previously discussed the marriage now kept their distance. The Marquis's wife, out of love for her son, spared no effort to find him a suitable match. My eldest aunt, who was known for her political acumen, seized an opportunity and secured this marriage alliance. The other party only mentioned that they were engaged to the Lin family, but did not specify the bride. Since this marriage was arranged by my eldest aunt, my cousin had already regarded it as her own. The elders in the family also tacitly agreed. Therefore, in my previous life, even though everyone knew that my cousin was faking her illness, No one exposed her. After all, entering the palace to participate in the imperial selection was just a sham, and marrying into the marquis's mansion was the real benefit. After my cousin finished speaking, the room was silent. It was just participating in the selection, not being selected. How could she just give up a good marriage? My eldest aunt was the first to snap out of it, her face darkening as she glared at my cousin. What nonsense are you talking about? You're the eldest sister, no one can go over your head. Those words were also a warning to me. My mother was overjoyed inside, but she didn't dare show it. She gently held my hand and agreed, yes. Ji Yan is the eldest sister, her marriage comes first. The others didn't care either, after all. They were all daughters of the Lin family. So it didn't matter who married whom. My cousin snorted coldly, if I marry, I will marry a prince. Who would want to marry a worthless illegitimate son? Upon hearing this, everyone present gasped in shock. My eldest aunt, still shaken, hurriedly called for someone to close the doors and windows. My grandfather sat upright, his voice stern. Watch your tongue. How dare you speak so boldly? How can I dare to let you enter the palace for the selection? He has no real power or connections, he's only gotten this far by being cautious. If my cousin acts so boldly and offends someone important, it would be a disaster for the entire family. Given my grandfather's temperament, the selection process might be disrupted. My mother sighed imperceptibly and gripped my hand even tighter. Only I remained calm as I looked at my cousin. Someone who has already died once, what else could she possibly do? My cousin did not disappoint me. I don't know what methods she used, but she not only persuaded my grandfather but also insisted on marrying me off before she entered the palace. Citing our deep sisterly bond, my eldest aunt was so angry that she fainted on the spot. The household affairs were entirely handed over to my mother. My mother showed no mercy, using my high-status marriage as an excuse to prepare an extravagant dowry of 60 carriages. By the time my eldest aunt realized what was happening, the dowry list had already been delivered to the marquis's mansion. She was so angry that she nearly fainted again. On the day of my wedding, my cousin dressed up in her finest attire to see me off. She was already beautiful, but now she looked even more arrogant. She looked at me with schadenfreude and whispered in my ear, "Since I gave you this marriage, I'll also give you the blessing of being a widow." I smiled indifferently. The eldest son of the Marquis of Zhongwu had been fatally wounded and was unable to have children. This was no secret in the homes of the nobility. It was just that my family was not high-ranking, so we couldn't find out about it. In my previous life, I was a prince's consort for a lifetime, so how could I not know the secrets of those wealthy and powerful families? It was just a change of place to live as a widow. What difference was there between the third prince's mansion and the Zhongwu Marquis's mansion? If you really want to talk about it. I glanced indifferently at my cousin. If she had lived 2 more years, she would have known that this eldest son would have a future of boundless wealth and honor. Where did she get the confidence to think that she would definitely become a prince's consort? Did she really think that the position of prince's consort was passed down from generation to generation in our Lin family? 6 Amidst the fanfare, I was welcomed into the Zhongwu Marquis's mansion. As the red veil was lifted, the man who would be my husband for the rest of my life came into view. Qin Shao wasn't particularly handsome, but he made up for it with his tall stature, deep-set eyes, and the rugged charm of a warrior. I looked at him, and he looked at me. I was plain-looking, nowhere near as beautiful as my cousin, and certainly no match for the elegant noblewomen of high-ranking families. Therefore, despite his efforts to hide it, I quickly noticed the fleeting glimpse of sadness in the corner of his eye. But what did it matter? He didn't love me, and I certainly didn't love him either. Qin Shao stayed for only a short while before being dragged away by the wedding revelers to drink. As he was leaving, he glanced at me with a gloomy look. "You go ahead and settle in. Don't wait for me." The originally lively bridal chamber suddenly fell silent. The people in the Marquis's mansion had different expressions. Some smirked, some gloated, and a few silently sighed with their heads bowed. No one showed any surprise. I understood. It seemed that Qin Zhao's impotence was no longer a secret in the Marquis's mansion. I stopped the maid who wanted to stand up for me, stood up, curtsied slightly to Qin Zhao, and smiled faintly. I understand. My lord need not worry. Qin Zhao paused for a moment. He likely hadn't expected me to be so understanding. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly. After hesitating for a moment, he finally left. On their wedding night, the groom ignored his bride. For a woman, that was the ultimate humiliation. But I didn't care at all. After all, in my previous life at the third prince's mansion, I had endured far greater humiliations. What was this compared to that? I watched the flickering candlelight and drifted off in thought. I wondered if my elder cousin would get her wish tomorrow during the selection. Qin Zhao didn't return to the bridal chamber all night. The next morning during the tea ceremony, the Marquis scolded Qin Zhao harshly with a stern expression. If it weren't for Lady Yang, the Marquis's wife, pleading on his behalf, he might have resorted to family discipline. In contrast, Lady Yang was much kinder. Not only did she show great affection for Qin Zhao, the illegitimate son, but she also bestowed a pile of gold and silver jewelry upon me to console me. My child, you were wronged last night. I am here to apologize on behalf of Zhao for you. Do not hold it against him. Lady Yang spoke softly, holding my hand and comforting me. I did not refuse and accepted everything she offered. This drew disdainful glances from the other sisters-in-law, as if my petty behavior had brought shame upon them. Fortunately, they prided themselves on their noble and dignified demeanor. So even if they looked down on me, they always kept up appearances. Therefore, my days in the Marquis's mansion were not too difficult. On the second day of the wedding, Qin Zhao returned to the military camp. On the day of the return visit, he still didn't show up. Instead, he had someone open his private treasury and told me to take whatever I wanted. I didn't hesitate to take as much as I could, which was my way of indirectly expressing my dissatisfaction with him. After all, given his behavior, what normal woman could tolerate such treatment? I returned to my parents' home with a cartload of gifts. Before we could exchange a few words, a eunuch arrived with an imperial edict. My cousin also returned with him. It turned out that my cousin had been chosen by the Empress Dowager and was to be married to the third prince as a concubine. She was now returning to the mansion to await her wedding. After expressing our gratitude, my grandfather secretly slipped a silver note to the eunuch who had delivered the imperial edict, then personally led him to the front hall for tea and a rest. My cousin remained in the inner courtyard. After several days apart, her cousin looked noticeably thinner. No doubt life in the palace had been tough. A prince's concubine, it sounded like the height of honor. But in the end, she was still just a concubine, forced to bow and scrape before the main wife. A family that truly loved their daughter wouldn't consider this a good match. But imperial grace was vast, and they dared not refuse. My eldest aunt could only hold my cousin and weep silently. But my cousin pushed her away with a displeased expression on such a joyous day. Mother, crying like this is unlucky. My eldest aunt stood there stunned for a moment, her body going limp. Fortunately, my mother acted quickly and supported her, preventing her from losing her composure. My cousin glanced at her guiltily, then quickly turned her gaze to me. It's my fault. I forgot that today is my sister's return visit. I hope she doesn't blame me for stealing your thunder. I wonder how she's been at the Marquis's mansion. Hey, where's my brother-in-law? Could he have not accompanied my sister back? My cousin looked at me maliciously and smiled meaningfully. She looked like someone in a position of power. I didn't want to respond, but she leaned closer to me and whispered with a smile. I hear that the Marquis's mansion is full of wolves and tigers. You must fight for yourself, little sister. And don't die too early. I shook my head silently and looked at her with a half-smile. Don't argue with fools. It seemed that some people would never learn even if they lived 100 years. If the Marquis's mansion was full of wolves and tigers, was the third prince's mansion a haven? The third prince, Ling Su, was in his 20s. His biological mother was Consort Yi, who came from the Suan Marquis's mansion and was very favored by the emperor. The third prince himself was handsome and distinguished. Marrying the third prince seemed like a perfect match. But think about it, ordinary princes of his age have been married for years. Why is the third prince, with such advantageous conditions, still alone, without even a concubine? In my previous life, I was mysteriously betrothed to the third prince as his main wife. It wasn't until the day of the wedding that I finally learned the truth. It turned out that the third prince had already pledged his heart to someone else. And that someone was none other than the young eunuch who had grown up with him. The third prince was into men. Although the empress tried to hide it, there were no secrets in the palace. The high-ranking noble families who were closely connected to the harem naturally all knew about it. These families all avoided the third prince like the plague. Not only would they never consider marrying their daughters to him, but they even warned their sons to stay far away from him, lest they be led astray. The emperor was a kind-hearted man. He couldn't force someone to marry against their will. So he simply stopped interfering. The emperor had many sons. He didn't need to worry about this one. But Iguafe had only this one son. And as a mother, she would never give up on her child. Over the years, she had secretly sent countless beauties to the third prince. But he remained unmoved. Instead, he grew even more affectionate toward that young eunuch. Enraged, Iguafe vowed to have the young eunuch killed. But she dared not act, as the third prince threatened to take his own life. In desperation, she gave up on the idea of having the third prince produce an heir and decided to adopt one from the imperial clan instead. But to adopt, she first needed to find a wife for the third prince as a mere figurehead. That's why she set her sights on me. A lowly born, plain-looking, seemingly honest and virtuous maiden. But I couldn't understand why she would choose my cousin in this life. After all, my cousin and I were completely different in both appearance and temperament. I wanted to warn her, but my cousin's smug expression was truly repulsive. Moreover, although she hadn't actually killed me in my previous life, she had indeed harbored murderous intent toward me. She had simply killed the wrong person. Thinking of this, I suddenly felt a pang of pity for her. In my previous life, I, the foolish older sister, believed I was living a better life than her, which fueled her jealousy and hatred toward me. So, when I went out to burn incense, she rushed to the carriage and stabbed me repeatedly through the curtain. But she never knew that the person inside the carriage wasn't me. It was the little eunuch whom the third prince cherished most. She thought that the person sitting in the 8-person palanquin, symbolizing the status of a prince's consort, must be me. Little did she know that I was merely a decoration in the third prince's mansion and had no right to enjoy the treatment of a prince's consort. The true mistress of the third prince's mansion was that little eunuch. Unfortunately, my cousin had lost all her senses at the time, and the little eunuch had always preferred to dress as a woman. So she didn't recognize the face of the person in the palanquin and was stabbed to death by the guards on the spot. After the little eunuch died, the third prince also committed suicide out of love. I, on the other hand, became the true master of the prince's mansion. Come to think of it, my cousin seems to be my benefactor after all. So I smiled even more sincerely. Thank you for your concern, sister. I wish you all the best and hope that everything goes well for you. The mansion was busy with my cousin's wedding, so I couldn't stay long. After returning to the Marquis's mansion, Lady Yang sent someone to call me. First, she wanted to speak on Qin Zhao's behalf regarding today's return visit. Second, she had heard about my cousin's wedding and wanted me to choose a gift to send back. Before I could say anything, I heard the crown prince's wife congratulate me in a strange tone. Your family is so blessed. Your younger sister married into the marquis's mansion. And you are even more blessed. Marrying into the prince's mansion. How wonderful and congratulatory. I smiled faintly and did not respond. Instead, I glanced around discreetly with the corner of my eye. I saw Lady Ho sitting there as steady as a mountain, showing no intention of intervening. The other sisters-in-law were all covering their mouths with handkerchiefs and laughing, without the slightest regard for propriety. I immediately understood. Today's incident was clearly orchestrated by these people to make a mockery of me. What a kind-faced but cruel Lady Ho. It seemed that the Marquis of Zhongwu was more cunning than I had imagined. After returning to the courtyard, Dong Xia, who was with my mother, came to see me at the Marquis's mansion, saying that I had left something behind. It was then that I learned the truth about my cousin's marriage to the third prince. Just like in my previous life, the imperial concubine summoned several beautiful women from lowly families. My cousin was naturally among them. However, the Empress Dowager favored another concubine surnamed Li. Seeing the situation was dire, my cousin bribed an inconspicuous palace maid in the Empress Dowager's quarters. She instructed the maid to secretly inform her when the third prince arrived. Upon receiving the news, she secretly changed into a palace maid's attire and hid outside the Empress Dowager's quarters. When the third prince was leaving, she deliberately acted as if she had accidentally bumped into him and threw herself into his arms. She believed that with her beauty, she would surely win the third prince's favor. But to her surprise, the third prince became furious and ordered her to be beaten to death on the spot. My cousin was terrified and could only reveal her true identity as a palace maid. This immediately alerted the empress. The imperial concubine had never taken a liking to her. But after this incident, for some reason, she suddenly changed her mind. She abandoned the Li family, who had been previously chosen, and selected my cousin instead. However, she was not made the main wife, but a concubine. My cousin returned home without revealing a single word. All this information was obtained by my grandfather from the eunuch who delivered the imperial edict. It is said that my grandfather was very angry and said that after my cousin got married, regardless of whether she was rich or poor, she would have nothing to do with the Lin family. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the imperial concubine did not make a big deal out of it. Otherwise, the reputation of all the girls in the family would have been tarnished. I didn't care, because the Marquis's mansion would not divorce me because of this. On the contrary, the worse my reputation becomes, the happier some people will be. It's just a pity for my other sisters at home. If their reputations are tarnished because of my cousin's reckless behavior, that would truly be an undeserved disaster. Even Xiu sighed in relief alongside me. Thank goodness the Empress Dowager is kind-hearted. The groom-to-be already dislikes the young lady. If her reputation is further ruined because of the eldest daughter, what will become of her in the future? I smiled and didn't respond. Is the Empress consort really kind-hearted? Someone who would use her status to harm innocent women for her own son can't be a good person. She probably chose my cousin because of her beautiful face and her vain and reckless nature. As for why she was only a concubine, I think it was probably a means to control my cousin. After all, once my cousin married into the third prince's mansion, the matter of the young eunuch would inevitably come to light. At that point, the Empress consort could use her status as the official wife to tempt her, hinting that she could rise to power by bringing her son along. My cousin would undoubtedly do everything in her power to achieve that. It's just a pity that the imperial consort didn't understand her son well enough and greatly underestimated the third prince's feelings for that little eunuch. This scheming, with everyone harboring ulterior motives, was bound to end in mutual destruction. My cousin's actions in the palace were still not kept secret. At least in the Zhongwu Marquis's mansion, it had already become a laughingstock. Fortunately, thanks to the ambiguous attitude of the Marquis's wife and the frequent ridicule of my sisters-in-law, I was able to figure out the temperaments of everyone in the Marquis's mansion. This allowed me to quickly establish a foothold in the Marquis's mansion. Even more unexpectedly, Qin Shao didn't seem to dislike me so much anymore. Although he still resides in the military camp. Even when he occasionally returns, he stays in his study to rest, but at least he no longer treats me with a cold face. He occasionally exchanges a few words with me and even has people send me small gifts. Everything seems to be slowly improving. 2 years passed peacefully. During these 2 years, news about my cousin grew increasingly scarce. Since she married the third prince, my grandfather seemed to have made up his mind not to interfere in her affairs anymore. My eldest aunt, however, couldn't let it go. She would occasionally send people to inquire about her, and even visited the third prince's mansion in person. But out of 10 visits, she only saw my cousin once. The other times, only her personal maid came out to dismiss them with a few words. Later, the third prince's mansion outright refused all visits, citing my cousin's illness as the reason. My eldest aunt was frantic with worry and even approached me, hoping I could ask Lady Ho to intervene and inquire further. I politely declined her request, because I knew that my cousin had undoubtedly been placed under house arrest by the third prince, just like I had been in my previous life. That year, another major event occurred. The emperor suddenly fell gravely ill and was bedridden. As the position of heir was vacant, all the princes except the third prince, who was destined to never ascend the throne, had a chance. For a time, there were undercurrents of power struggles. Due to Lady Yang, the wife of the Marquis of Zhongwu, the Zhongwu Marquis's mansion became the natural base for the fourth prince's faction. The fourth prince was the eldest son of the empress and had many supporters, making him the most promising candidate to ascend the throne. As a result, everyone in the mansion, from the marquis down to the maidservants, walked around with a sense of anticipation. Especially Lady Yang, who had abandoned her former virtuous and charitable demeanor and no longer bothered to pretend. She became harsh toward the concubine-born sons and daughters in the mansion. Especially Qin Shao, the eldest concubine-born son, who was particularly irritating to her. However, since Qin Shao was often absent from the mansion, she could only take out her frustration on me. She would make excuses to pray for the emperor's well-being and make me copy Buddhist scriptures hundreds of times, or punish me by making me kneel in the ancestral hall because I had no children. I didn't resist and silently endured all the harassment. I knew that these days would soon be over. Their hopes were doomed to be dashed, and the Zhongwu Marquis's mansion would soon be renamed. Sure enough, before long, the old emperor passed away. The struggle between the princes finally came to an end. Just like in my previous life, it was the sixth prince, Ling Yun, who had no presence whatsoever, who finally ascended the throne. The fourth prince, who was the legitimate son of the empress, was killed for treason. The Zhongwu Marquis's mansion, as the fourth prince's faction, was also implicated. All adult males were sent to the border, while the women and children were sent back to their hometowns. Of course, there were exceptions. Qin Shao and I were among them. From beginning to end, Qin Shao had been loyal to the sixth prince. He had also rendered great service in the battle for the throne. The plaque of the Zhongwu Marquis's mansion had just been removed when the new emperor personally bestowed a plaque of the Yong'an Marquis's mansion to be hung in its place. The Marquis's mansion was still the same. The difference was that Qin Shao became the Yong'an Marquis, with the title passing down to his descendants, and I became the Marquis. That day, Qin Shao locked himself in his study and drank himself into a stupor. Ignoring the guards' attempts to stop me, I entered the study for the first time. In a state of confusion and infatuation, Qin Shao and I finally became husband and wife. After coming to his senses, Qin Shao gently embraced me and told me his story. That year, the Marquis was chased and wounded by enemies. With no other choice, He hid in a nearby village. It was there that he met Zhou Shi, the mother of Qin Xiao. Zhou Shi saved the wounded marquis, and during his recovery, they developed feelings for each other. After the marquis recovered, he married Zhou Shi in a ceremony witnessed by her parents. Soon after, Zhou Shi became pregnant. However, the marquis had to leave urgently due to the outbreak of border wars. Before departing, he promised Zhou Shi that once the war ended, he would return to the capital to fetch her in a palanquin. Zhou waited year after year, but even when Qin Xiao was 7 years old, the marquis still had not returned. Zhou had no choice but to grit her teeth, bid farewell to her parents and fellow villagers, and take her son to the capital alone. In the end, when they finally found the Zhongwu marquis's mansion after much hardship, they discovered that the marquis had married a woman from a high-ranking family named Yang 5 years earlier. Upon seeing Zhou Shi and her son come to his door, the marquis likely felt a sense of guilt. Despite Yang Shi's objections, he granted Zhou Shi the status of a concubine. He also took great care of his son, Qin Xiao. However, this only made Yang Shi hate Zhou Shi and her son even more. Just 1 year later, Zhou Shi suddenly died of natural causes. The marquis not only failed to investigate the truth thoroughly but merely sighed lightly, saying it was just bad luck, and let the matter drop. At this point, Qin Zhao's voice choked up. From that moment on, I knew that I had not only lost my mother but also my father. I hugged him tightly and patted his back silently. Later, Yang Shi also learned to be cunning. She knew that poisoning me again would tarnish her reputation. So she began to pretend to be virtuous, fawning over me in public and treating me better than her own son. I knew she was trying to flatter me to death, so I acted like a spoiled brat on the surface but secretly studied books, practiced calligraphy, and trained in martial arts. Once I had the strength to protect myself, I stopped pretending and followed my father into battle. I knew Yang Shi would never forgive herself for being deceived. To prevent further complications, I pretended to be injured and took the secret potion given to me by the 6th prince, making everyone believe I had been severely wounded. Qin Xiao grew increasingly excited. He said the potion was obtained by the 6th prince from a wandering physician. Within a year of taking it, it would render a man impotent. Therefore, after hiring many imperial physicians and sending numerous beautiful maidservants to him, Yang Shi finally believed him. I smiled and asked him, "What if the medicine is too effective? Are you really going to remain unmarried for the rest of your life?" Qin Xiao remained silent. He never answered, turning his head and falling asleep. I looked out the window. It was still pitch black outside. The light in my eyes dimmed along with it. From that night onward, Qin Xiao moved out of the study and began living with me. Soon after, I became pregnant. However, just then, a plague broke out in the capital. Even several noblemen in the palace fell ill. Being pregnant, I dared not take any risks. So I discussed it with Qin Xiao and decided to leave the city and stay at the estate for a while. Qin Xiao readily agreed. The city is a bit unsettled right now. Once I have my leave, I will personally escort you there. This will be a trouble for you, my lord. I smiled gently, placed my hand on my waist, and personally escorted him out of the courtyard gate. As soon as I turned around, I immediately had Xiu Zhu take a message to the 3rd prince's mansion. Xiu Zhu's figure grew smaller and smaller, and I silently prayed in my heart. Elder cousin, I hope this time you won't let me down." Qin Xiao had been busy with official matters for several days and finally managed to free himself after 7 or 8 days. Seeing his exhausted expression, I invited him to join me in the carriage. Qin Xiao was truly exhausted. He leaned against the cushion and fell asleep as soon as he entered the carriage. I lifted the curtain and told the driver to stop, instructing him, "The marquis has just fallen asleep. Drive carefully and don't wake him." "Yes, sir." I then asked Xiu to help me down from the carriage. I'm afraid I might disturb the marquis. Please help me to the rear carriage. The rear carriage mainly contained my personal belongings. Though the space was somewhat cramped, it was more than enough for Xiu and me to sit comfortably. Xiu found a mattress and placed it under my waist. The journey is long, perhaps the lady should rest her head for a while. I nodded. Closing my eyes, I found myself unable to sleep. As the carriage left the city gate, we were immediately confronted by a group of beggars blocking the road. The accompanying guards rushed forward to drive them away. At that moment, a frail-looking beggar suddenly darted out of the crowd and rushed toward the front carriage. His movements were too swift for the coachman to react in time, and he was stabbed, falling to the ground in agony. By the time others rushed over to stop him, it was already too late. The little beggar burst into laughter, raising the dagger in his hand toward the people inside the carriage. Die. You're going to die. The Marquis's mansion and all its wealth should have been mine. How dare you take what is rightfully mine? In my next life, I will make the right choice. I will. Before he could finish his sentence, he was stabbed in the heart by a guard who had rushed over, and died on the spot. The half of his face that was exposed was clearly my cousin, whom I hadn't seen in many years. At the same time, the carriage curtain was lifted. Qin Xiao, stabbed several times, fell straight into a pool of blood. I was supported by Xiu and rushed over, just in time to see the scene. After a moment of dizziness, I collapsed to the ground. The Yongnan Marquis was assassinated, shocking the entire court. The new emperor was furious and ordered a thorough investigation. However, since the murderer had already died at the scene, the Ministry of Justice investigated thoroughly but could not reach a conclusive verdict. The new emperor had no choice but to punish the Minister of Justice with a 6-month reduction in salary. Meanwhile, the third prince, as the husband of the murderer, though lacking direct evidence of involvement, was still implicated and sentenced to mourn the late emperor for 3 years. In the imperial court, the matter was considered closed. However, in the streets, rumors ran rampant. Some even dug up the original marriage contract between Qin Xiao and the Lin family. Gradually, the most widely circulated version became that the third prince's concubine, driven by love turned to hatred, had killed the Yongnan Marquis. But was that really the truth? 21 I kept vigil at Qin Xiao's coffin for 3 days and 3 nights. Looking at him lying stiffly in the coffin, I felt a pang of pity. I had thought that we could live happily together like an ordinary couple, even if he held me in his arms and called out another woman's name. Until I witnessed that scene in the study, that day. I had just learned that I was pregnant and rushed to the study to share the joy with Qin Xiao. But before I could push the door open, I heard the sound of soft moans coming from inside. My mind went blank. I could only lean against the doorframe to keep from collapsing. I don't know how long it took, but the intimate sounds finally stopped. What followed were the sobs of a woman and the tender voice of a man. Qiner doesn't ask for a title. As long as Xiao doesn't despise me, I'm willing to stay by your side for the rest of my life without a name or status. Fool. We've come this far together. How could I ever let you suffer? What about Linshi? Qin Xiao fell silent. After a long time, he finally said, my engagement to Linshi was nothing but Youngshi's scheme. With her looks and family background, she's good enough to be a concubine, he finished. The heart I had been holding on to finally died completely. It turns out that some things really do run in the family. Qin Xiao hated the old marquis for abandoning his wife and children, yet he himself had ended up taking the same path of demoting his wife to a concubine. Thinking of this, I stroked my still flat abdomen and silently prayed. Please don't let it be a son. I'm not the type to sit around and wait for death. Since Qin Xiao was the first to act unjustly, don't blame me for being unrighteous. Fortunately, because I was pregnant, Qin Xiao probably feared I would be upset. so he hadn't carried out his plan to demote me to a concubine. This gave me enough time to carefully plan my next move. And this epidemic was the perfect opportunity. The third prince's mansion strictly monitored my cousin, and outsiders had no chance to approach her. But coincidentally, the noble Empress Dowager in the palace also contracted the epidemic, and the third prince went to the palace with a young eunuch to attend to her. And that's exactly why I had the chance to act. So I had Shizhu disguise herself, bribed a servant from the third prince's mansion, and sneaked in to visit my cousin. Shizhu told my cousin about Qin Shao being granted a title of nobility and my pregnancy, and finally left her a bag of silver. After that, I had someone spread the news that I was going to the country estate. Given my understanding of my cousin, she would certainly not waste such a golden opportunity. As for Qin Shao, I had already administered a small dose of sleeping potion to him 2 days prior, leaving him in a constant state of drowsiness. Coincidentally, he had been busy with official duties recently, so everyone assumed his drowsiness was due to overwork, including himself. On the day of departure, I had already had soothing incense burned in the carriage. Those spices were something I had gone to great lengths to obtain. Ordinary people would not be affected by them, but for someone like Qin Shao who had been drugged, the effect was remarkably potent. So, forget about ordinary sounds of a fight. Even if the sky were to collapse, he wouldn't hear a thing. To die in his sleep, unaware of anything, was the last bit of kindness I could show him. After Qin Shao was buried, I had someone bring the woman who had been hiding him in the study. The woman, no longer the delicate woman she had been before, began to curse at me. "Lin Shi, what are you?" "I am Zhao's woman, and I am carrying his child." I didn't say a word, but motioned toward the door. Soon, an old woman carrying a bowl walked in. I forced open her mouth and poured the black liquid down her throat. Soon, the woman collapsed on the ground in agony, blood flowing down her thighs. "Take her back to where she belongs." I turned away and closed my eyes. This woman was named Song Yunqing, who had been betrothed to Qin Shao since childhood and later became the concubine of the fourth prince. After the fourth prince was executed for treason, all the women in his household were sent to the imperial brothel. However, Song Yunqing managed to change her identity through Qin Zhao's connections and hid herself in a marquis's mansion. Now, it was time for her to return to where she belonged. A few months later, I gave birth to a daughter. The emperor sent many gifts and conferred the title of Princess in Kong on my newborn daughter. The eunuch who delivered the imperial edict tentatively asked me, "Madam, would you like to adopt a son from a collateral branch of the family as the heir to the Yuan marquis?" I refused repeatedly, saying that one daughter was enough for me in this life. The man seemed very satisfied and smiled, telling me to take good care of myself. After he left, Xiuzhu asked me in confusion, "Why didn't you agree? Why won't you adopt a son? This is a hereditary marquisate." I shook my head. "Silly girl. Precisely because it's hereditary, I can't adopt a son. Besides, I have my own daughter. Why would I want to raise someone else's son? What if he turns out to be ungrateful? After all, the son I adopted in my previous life was a complete ingratitude." A few days later, the messenger arrived again. This time, he brought an edict granting me the title of first-rank Lady of Virtue. I knew this was the emperor's reward for my discretion and understanding. I held my daughter in my arms. Looking at the wealth and glory that now belonged solely to the two of us, what more could I possibly want?